How do you deal with a repair that needs to be done after closing? I'm helping one of my sellers with this right now, and you want to kind of think it through. Of course, every situation is going to be different, but the clear cut answer is going to be make it so that you don't have any ties to it after closing. So you want to just be done. You want to, whether you're giving a credit, which is great, or paying for the service up front. Right now, I have a seller who has been so amazing, so accommodating to her buyer. They wanted to move up the closing date, and she was happy to do that. However, when they made their repair requests, it put a lot of pressure on her. She actually was out of town for personal reasons. So during the whole inspection period, I was her boots on the ground. I helped coordinate with her who was going to come in and do what. There wasn't a lot of repairs, but there were things that needed to be done. And one of the repairs was not able to come until after our closing date. So the buyer is fine with that. However, we want to protect her as a seller, not that, she's doing anything dishonest or wrong or anything, but she's just wiping her hands and saying, I'm done. So once we sign those papers, I don't owe anything for this property, right? So now as a buyer, maybe you want to, if that repair was really important, maybe you were worried about extra repairs that could come up after, maybe one step is to, postpone the closing date. In this case, the buyer is not that worried about it. It was not a major repair. But again, my seller wants to make sure, she said, Joni, how do we do this so that I'm not worried about it after? And there are two options. One is just giving a credit, which at this point was not really an option because of a couple reasons. Basically, it's a VA loan, unless if it was a personal credit. Otherwise, we'd have to rebalance things right now, redo paperwork, and we're almost at the closing table. We're about 27 hours away from the closing table. So instead of doing a credit, in this case, the buyer was happy with doing, just after closing, having this service provider come and do this certain repair. So again, the seller, instead of just, paying for it afterwards, she's paying for it up front, and that's it. Anything further, say that they charge more, they find something different. She's just saying, this is it. I'm covering this service, and that's it. So again, as a buyer, if you are worried about that, I would encourage you to postpone that closing date, or, I did have a buyer where this was a few weeks ago, I closed on a home, and the seller and the buyer agreed on a new roof. So that was a major repair. Actually, the buyer was not even able to get insurance on their home. It was a 17-year-old roof. And part of our negotiations was, okay, we're gonna split the difference. We're gonna meet in the middle. Everyone was happy to pay 50-50 on this new roof. However, we put it in the terms ahead of time, that we were going to, if there was any extra costs, that the buyer and seller were gonna split it. If there were extra boards or anything like that needed to be addressed, that the roofer found that they didn't know when they gave us that quote, everyone would happily split it. So make sure that your terms are clear up front, and if you can, do a credit. That's probably going to be the easiest way. So I hope this helps. I know that every closing is different, every transaction is different. I'm happy to say that the buyer and the seller were playing nice. It's nice to play nice, and to be respectful and honoring. And obviously the seller wants to make sure that the buyer enjoys their new home, and the buyer just wants to get in and feel at peace in that new home. So just be good to each other all around. I've had transactions where that was not necessarily the case, and that nobody really wins at the end of the day. So just being, just cooperating with each other is always a huge step. But just make sure that you protect yourself. Again, if you are that seller, make sure that you have clear terms so that there's not anything hanging over you. Once you're done, you're able to just sign the paperwork and be done with that property. I'll put my information in the chat. I would love to connect with you on your personal experience, or if you have questions selling your home in the Villages, Florida. Have an amazing day, and I'm sure we'll talk soon.